The clock struck 7 p.m., and the bright studio lights flared to life, bouncing off the sleek glass desk at the heart of the bustling newsroom. Jenna Marlowe, a sharp-tongued and wildly popular liberal talk show host, adjusted her microphone with her trademark confident grin. "Good evening, folks," she began, her voice smooth yet electrifying, the kind that made viewers lean in closer to their screens. "Tonight we're pulling back the curtain on the real Karoline Leavitt, the rising star of the far right, or just another puppet for a dangerous agenda?" The audience at home braced themselves. Jenna had a reputation for dismantling her political opponents with surgical precision, and tonight promised no less. Her fiery wit, coupled with a relentless pursuit of accountability, had made her a star on the national stage. But what no one knew, not her loyal fans, nor her ever-watching critics, was that tonight's show would be her last, though not for reasons anyone could have predicted. The camera cut to a close-up of Jenna, her emerald green eyes sharp with purpose. As she launched into her monologue, a storm brewed beyond the studio walls, both literally and figuratively. Outside, the city streets were slick with rain, the wind rattling the tall glass windows of the station's headquarters. Inside, an unease rippled through the control room as producers exchanged uneasy glances. Jenna had insisted on an unfiltered approach to tonight's broadcast, refusing to let the usual legal and editorial checks dull her edge. "Trust me," she'd said earlier that day, "this is the kind of truth that needs to be heard." Her words cut through the air as she laid into Leavitt, raising questions about her rapid rise in politics and the shadowy figures allegedly funding her campaign. But it wasn't long before her tone shifted, her critiques becoming unexpectedly personal, even venomous. Her audience, both in the studio and at home, was spellbound, some thrilled by her daring, others wincing at the sharpness of her remarks. But as the monologue unfolded, a low hum of discomfort began to build. It wasn't just her words. It was her intensity, the edge of something uncontrolled simmering beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to Jenna, her words were setting off a chain reaction, one that would explode far beyond her studio. The night was young, but the fallout had already begun, and just like that, the world of Jenna Marlowe began to tilt off its axis. Jenna's monologue cut through the broadcast like a razor. Her words were laced with sharp invective as she dissected Karoline Leavitt's policies and personal character. She challenged her background, accused her of being out of touch, and all but called her a puppet of wealthy donors. But it was her closing line that struck a nerve not just in her audience, but in the world beyond the studio walls. "If Karoline Leavitt is the future of American politics," Jenna said, leaning forward into the camera, her tone icy, "then we're on a crash course with disaster. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we stop pretending people like her have anything to offer this country besides division and deceit." The studio fell silent as the broadcast went to commercial. Jenna leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply, her adrenaline still pumping. The control room was quieter than usual. Normally, her team would buzz with chatter about how effective her delivery had been. But tonight, the atmosphere was different. She glanced through the glass wall of the booth, where her producer, Caleb, stood frozen, headset half off, staring at her like she'd just thrown a lit match into a gasoline tank. Jenna," Caleb said, stepping into the studio, his voice tight. "What the hell was that?" "What?" Jenna replied, feigning nonchalance as she sipped her water. "It's called the truth, Caleb. You should try it sometime." "That wasn't just the truth," Caleb said, his voice rising. "That was personal. You crossed a line." Jenna rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. What line? We've gone harder on plenty of others before. Why's she any different?" "Because this time you didn't just attack her policies. You attacked her family, her upbringing, her integrity." Caleb shook his head. "You didn't just push Boundaries tonight. You obliterated them." Before Jenna could respond, the door to the studio swung open, and Marcy, the show's PR manager, entered, her phone glued to her hand. Her face was pale, her expression grim. "Jenna, we have a problem. A big one." Marcy thrust her phone toward Jenna. On the screen was a growing wildfire of tweets, headlines, and clips from the broadcast. The hashtags "Ichas cancel Jenna Marlowe" and "Karoline Leavitt smear campaign" were trending nationwide. Prominent political figures on both sides of the aisle were condemning her remarks, while viewers flooded social media with outrage. Jenna frowned as she scrolled through the barrage of criticism. "They're overreacting," she muttered. "People just love to clutch their pearls." "It's not just the viewers," Marcy said, her voice tight. "Sponsors are pulling out. 2 advertisers have already dropped us, and the station execs are in an emergency meeting. This isn't going to blow over, Jenna. The gravity of..." The situation began to sink in. For all her bravado, Jenna had never been one to intentionally sabotage her career. She was bold, yes, but she also believed she was untouchable, protected by her wit, her ratings, and her loyal fan base. Now that illusion was crumbling before her eyes. "But I didn't lie," Jenna protested, her voice rising. "Everything I said was true. If people can't handle that, it's their problem, not mine." Caleb stepped closer, his tone softening. "Jenna, this isn't about truth. It's about how you said it. People don't just want facts. They want fairness. And tonight, you weren't fair." The words stung more than she cared to admit. Jenna looked away, her mind racing. Was she really the villain in this story? Or was she just the latest casualty of a world that couldn't handle uncomfortable truths? The door swung open again, this time revealing Scott Landry, the station's head of programming. His face was a mask of frustration and exhaustion, his tie loosened, his brow glistening with sweat. "Jenna," he said curtly, "we need to talk. Now." In the meeting that followed, Jenna was given an ultimatum: apologize publicly and immediately or face suspension. Her defiance flared again. "Apologize? For what? For saying what everyone's thinking?" she snapped. Scott's patience wore thin. "No, Jenna. For making this about you instead of the issues. For turning what could have been a powerful critique into a personal vendetta. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the network, the sponsors, and everyone who works." "Here..." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Jenna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Her actions had set off a chain reaction, and the consequences were spiraling out of control. For the first time in years, Jenna Marlowe felt something foreign and unnerving. Doubt. Doubt about her choices, her instincts, and the path ahead. As she left the meeting, her mind churned with questions. Had she gone too far? Or was this the price of speaking truth to power? She didn't have answers yet. But she knew one thing for certain. Her world had been irrevocably changed, and there was no going back. Jenna Marlowe sat in her dimly lit apartment, the hum of the city outside muffled by rain pattering against the windows. Her phone buzzed, relentlessly on the coffee table, notifications flashing like tiny explosions in the dark. She ignored it. The world seemed to be closing in on her, the noise from the backlash growing louder by the minute. Her face, usually a picture of confidence, was pale and drawn, her sharp features softened by exhaustion. The station had wasted no time. By morning, her suspension had been announced, a public statement released with carefully crafted language that distanced the network from her comments. "Jenna Marlowe's opinions do not reflect those of the station," it read, a dagger of betrayal cloaked in corporate professionalism. Her social media accounts were ablaze with fury. Some fans defended her fiercely, but even her most loyal supporters seemed shaken. The criticism wasn't just from conservatives. It came from liberals, journalists, and colleagues she'd once considered allies. They accused her of abandoning journalistic integrity, of making the fight personal instead of principled. She finally picked up her phone, scrolling through the comments. Some were cruel, others outright threatening. One message caught her attention. "You've gone too far this time. Maybe it's time to take a good hard look at yourself." Jenna tossed the phone aside and buried her head in her hands. The words echoed in her mind, not because they were harsh, but because deep down, she feared they might be true. Caleb's voice interrupted her spiral. He had come over uninvited, carrying a bottle of cheap whiskey and a look of concern. "You can't just sit here wallowing," he said, pouring a drink for both of them. "You need to figure out your next move." Jenna took the glass, but didn't drink. "I don't know what my next move is," she admitted, her voice uncharacteristically small. "For the first time in my career, I don't know how to fix this." Caleb leaned back, studying her. "You've always been good at tearing down the other side," he said. "But maybe this is your chance to build something instead, to show people who you are when the spotlight isn't on you." His words hit a nerve, but Jenna wasn't ready to accept them yet. "I didn't get where I am by playing nice, Caleb," she snapped. "You think Leavitt would have hesitated if the roles were reversed? This is war." Caleb shook his head. "It's not war, Jenna. It's life. And in life, you don't just win by being the loudest voice in the room. You win by being the one people trust." The comment lingered in the air, heavy with truth. Jenna wanted to fight back, to argue, but for once, she didn't have the energy. Instead, she stared into her untouched drink, her reflection rippling in the amber liquid. Later that night, as the storm outside raged on, Jenna sat alone, replaying the events of the past 24 hours in her mind. Her defiance had always been her armor, but now, cracks were beginning to show. She was at a crossroads, unsure of who she was without the unwavering conviction that had always driven her. For the first time in her life, Jenna Marlowe doubted not just her decisions, but herself, and that realization was far more terrifying than any backlash she faced. Jenna woke to the piercing buzz of her phone. She groaned, reaching for it on the nightstand, only to see Caleb's name flashing on the screen. "It's 6 in the morning, she muttered, answering groggily. "You need to get online. Now!" Caleb's voice crackled through, his tone urgent. "What is it this time? Another hashtag?" Jenna grumbled, but her stomach twisted with unease. "Just look," he said before hanging up. With a sinking feeling, Jenna opened her laptop. The moment she loaded the news, her heart stopped. A leaked video of Karoline Leavitt had gone viral overnight. In it, Leavitt was caught on a hot mic making disparaging remarks about her constituents, mocking their struggles and dismissing their concerns as drama for the cameras. The footage was damning, a direct contradiction to her polished, empathetic public persona. Jenna's initial reaction was a mix of vindication and rage. So I wasn't wrong about her, she thought. But as she scrolled through the endless reactions, online, her emotions grew more complicated. The public was in uproar, calling for accountability, but the leak also fueled conspiracy theories and personal attacks far worse than anything Jenna had said. The narrative was spinning out of control. But mid-morning, Jenna's phone rang again. This time it was Marcy. "You've seen the video?" Marcy asked, her tone clipped. "Of course," Jenna replied. "It's all anyone's talking about." "Well, brace yourself. Some of those conspiracy theories, they're dragging you into them. People are saying you orchestrated the leak. As payback for your suspension." Jenna froze. "That's ridiculous. I had nothing to do with it." "Doesn't matter," Marcy said flatly. "You're trending again, and not in a good way. If you don't address this, it's only going to get worse." Jenna slammed her laptop shut, pacing her living room. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. After years of calling out political figures for dodging accountability, she was now in the same position, facing accusations she couldn't prove false without sounding defensive. Hours later, Caleb arrived at her apartment again, This time with coffee and a laptop. You're not going to fix this by hiding, he said. You need to go live. Not on the network, not through a PR statement. Just you, raw and real. Jenna hesitated. You mean admit I messed up? No, Caleb said firmly. I mean, show them who you really are. Not the Jenna Marlowe who tears people apart, but the one who believes in something bigger. The one who can admit when she's wrong and still fight for what's right. His words hit her like a bolt of lightning. For the first time, Jenna saw a path forward. Not as the combative host who always had the last word, but as someone who could rise above the chaos. That night, Jenna went live from her home. Her voice shook as she began, but she pushed through. I want to address everything head-on, she said. I've made mistakes. I've let my passion turn into anger, and I've hurt people in the process. But what's happening now, the personal attacks, the conspiracies, it's not the way forward. If we want change, it has to start with accountability, including my own. The live stream was raw, unpolished, and miles away from her usual fiery persona. But as Jenna spoke, something shifted. The comments section, initially filled with vitriol, began to soften. Some viewers even defended her, calling her bravery a rare moment of honesty in a sea of spin. When the stream ended, Jenna felt lighter. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. The day of Jenna's reckoning arrived with a press conference called by the network. It was a last-ditch effort to salvage their reputation, and they had given Jenna one final chance to address the controversy in person. The newsroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and microphones, all pointed squarely at her. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. Jenna stood backstage, her palms sweating as she gripped the edges of the podium she was about to face. Caleb stood beside her, his expression firm yet encouraging. This is it, he said. You're not here to defend yourself. You're here to show them why you do what you do. Speak from the heart, Jenna. No scripts, no spin. She nodded, taking a deep breath. As she stepped onto the stage, the flashes of cameras and murmurs of the crowd hit her like a wave. For a fleeting moment, she felt small, like the world was too big and too hostile for her to face. But then she remembered why she had fought so hard in the first place. Not for herself, but for the people who deserved a voice. Jenna leaned into the microphone, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Good afternoon, she began, scanning the crowd. I want to thank you all for being here. Even those who came to criticize me, I deserve it. I've made mistakes, and I'm not here to pretend otherwise. The room stilled, reporters leaning forward in their seats. When I started in this industry, I told myself I'd never shy away from hard truths. But somewhere along the way, I let my passion turn into something uglier, something personal. What I said about Karoline Leavitt wasn't just unprofessional. It was wrong. And I'm sorry, not just to her, but to anyone I hurt in the process. Jenna's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. But let's not lose sight of what's important. That leaked video of Ms. Leavitt, those weren't my words, those were hers. And while I regret how I approached the discussion, the issues I raised remain real. This isn't about me anymore. It's about holding people accountable, no matter which side of the aisle they're on. A murmur rippled through the room. Jenna could see the reporters scribbling furiously, the cameras zooming in. She had their attention, but it wasn't enough. She needed to land this moment. I'm stepping away from my show, Jenna announced, the words heavy yet freeing. Gasps filled the air, followed by a stunned silence. Not because I've been forced to, but because I need to take a hard look at how I've contributed to the toxic discourse we see every day. I want to come back better. I want to fight for what's right, not for personal victory. As she finished, The room erupted into questions and flashes, but Jenna felt calm for the first time in days. She had faced the storm head-on, not with fire, but with humility. And in that moment, she knew she was beginning to reclaim not just her career, but her sense of purpose. Weeks later, Jenna found herself walking through a quiet park, the crisp, autumn air swirling leaves around her feet. The chaos of the scandal had died down, leaving behind a strange and unfamiliar calm. Her decision to step away from her show had shocked many, but it had also sparked a conversation about accountability and the role of media in public discourse. For the first time in years, Jenna felt like she wasn't just shouting into the void. She was listening. She'd spent the last few weeks reflecting on everything: her career, her values, and the kind of legacy she wanted to leave behind. It wasn't easy to face the harsh truths about herself, but she knew it was necessary. She had started volunteering at local journalism workshops, teaching young reporters about the importance of truth and integrity. It felt good to give back, to use her experience to guide others instead of tearing people down. One day, as she sat on a park bench, her phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. It was a link to an op-ed about her press conference, titled, "A Voice Humbled, but Not Silenced." The article praised her willingness to own her mistakes and highlighted her potential to lead a new wave of thoughtful, impactful journalism. Jenna smiled faintly, her breath visible in the chilly air. She wasn't sure what her next step would be, whether she'd return to television or find a new path entirely. But for the first time in years, she wasn't consumed by the need to win every battle. She was focused on the bigger picture. As she stood to leave, Jenna felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She walked away from the park, her steps purposeful. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready to face it with a renewed sense of who she was and what she stood for. Her voice would return, not louder, but stronger.